how do you navigate it, both if you're the parent longing to re-engage with your adult children or the adult child who's dealing with the emotional impact of cutting your parents off?
Hey, thank you for coming. Welcome to the Love Shack.
What's family estrangement? It's when young adults cut off their parents, simply put. This is happening more now than ever before in our known history, even though it goes against what most of us are taught as children. Things like the family is forever and the bonds of blood cannot be replicated. No one will ever love you like your family. I remember hearing that when I was growing up. They'll provide for your physical and emotional well-being, and there is nothing that's unmatchable, right? Not friends. I remember hearing your friends are going to come and go, but your family will always be here for you. Your family is going to be there for you through thick and thin, and your friends and lovers, they're going to come and go. No worries, we got you. That was very much the mindset that I grew up in. I just want to pause here for a moment. Does this sound a lot like the narrative between husbands and wives to you? It sure does to me. It's the duty of your spouse to love you for who you are, have your back, and never leave you no matter what. We're even expected to choose our partners over our families upon marriage in the Bible. I selected a passage, Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the woman will cleave unto her husband, and they shall become one flesh." Interesting. In spite of these conflicted beliefs that we have been raised in the narrative in our culture, relationally it seems we have had enough of holding to these beliefs both with our parents and our partners. It seems as though there's a new emerging belief that appears to be more along the lines of, I do not, will not put up with mistreatment from anyone. It doesn't matter if we're married or we're blood. I can't do it anymore. And so I just want to dive into a survey that was actually done, and it's highlighted again in this article, that I found really interesting. In spite of these beliefs and narratives that we've been raised in, even though they're conflicting, we both probably have had an experience, I know I certainly have, of personally being stuck in them. I've navigated both of those conversations in my evolution of becoming an adult woman, from my family of origin, through religious beliefs, through having to navigate what's mine and what isn't as a parent with my children. And I am seeing in my office and my private practice, both online and in person, there is an evolution that's happening, or shall we say a picking up of couples coming in, having had enough with their parents and having had enough with their in-laws and having had enough with their siblings or step family members. And so we are growing weary of being tolerant with some of these things. And so there was a survey done by Carl Pillemer, a professor at Cornell University and author of Fault Lines, Fractured Families and How to Mend Them. And he found that in 2020, when he surveyed Americans over the age of 18, 27% of them were estranged from their family members. That's 25. That's more than 25%, like a quarter of them, where they were estranged from at least one family member, which is still 25% of us are facing that.
That's huge.
Yeah. And I love the point that they pointed out in the article that although this is a quarter, he believes that it's much higher because there's still a great reluctance to discuss such personal and stigmatized topics among us. So this is something that, you know, is probably far greater than the 25%.
Well, we've talked about this. This is a lot of what we navigate as people on our side. There seems to be such reluctance and so much that goes to if you choose to share something that we've been taught or told or whatever, demonstrate that we don't talk about those things. We don't share those things in our family. A lot of these types of things are, I think, very much on the low side statistically, because I think a lot of us don't come forward and share.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of shame around.
Absolutely.
And we can also feel like when we're going through that, this is such a confusing place. It doesn't matter what end of the spectrum you're on, whether you're the parent or the child, and all of a sudden you're left with a void. That is a very heartbreaking, difficult thing to wrap your head around. And yes, the throw off is going to be a tremendous amount of grief, probably a lot of regret, and a lot of emotions are going to come screaming to the surface that absolutely are going to affect our mental health. And that's unavoidable simply because there was once a bond there, whether that was blood or emotional. And then when those bonds get severed, it has an impact on us as a human being. So I wanted to dive a little deeper into, let's see if we can get through some of the chaos and the confusion about, let's just look at how this happens. Like, how do we get here? Whether we're talking about parent-child or we're talking about lovers who are approaching a divorce or a separation. because it happens from the same place. Basically, when emotional factors that contribute to a relational estrangement are unmet, those needs and expectations that we have, the values and differences that are the refusal to embrace them, to understand them, to share them, or lifestyle differences. I have a different lifestyle than I relate to as far as my children go or my partner goes. I don't relate. I don't understand. I don't want to entertain it. I don't want to talk about it. And then difficult childhood experiences that we come from. Those all have an ongoing, continuously accumulating impact on us as a human being. And that's the case for all of us. And so when we find ourselves in a place where our emotional needs and experiences are misunderstood or outright rejected, it leads to feelings of doubt, grief, regret, unworthiness, or straight up rebellion. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So then incites the pursuit of relief from this pain, and that is sought by the cutting off of, essentially the removing of the person or people who inflict these unwanted emotions in us. It is then we believe that we will have the relief and the peace that we typically long for, that we long for in these places that are difficult. And regardless of what the circumstances are in any given situation or dynamic, these are the emotional aftermath and or the building of these emotional experiences that lead us to cutting somebody off, severing the relationship, feeling like we can't go down this road anymore. Now, I think it's really important to highlight that because when you really kind of get to the crux of how we operate as human beings, it doesn't seem to be as complicated as it feels. We know that if there are unmet needs or a dismissal of somebody's beliefs, values, lifestyles, or the dismissal of not wanting to understand what happened in some of these childhood experiences, that's going to create an emotional experience inside of me that I am going to want to find some repose from, some peace with, because to hang out in that pain for long periods of time with no new understanding or insight is going to dismantle me as a human being. That being the case, how come it gets so complicated and so painful? And you can boil it down to literally a couple of things. Number one, my refusal to understand and be with where you're coming from when I don't agree. Okay. When this happens, what we typically do as a human being is we get highly defensive. And when I get defensive, I just want to shut the conversation down because to have the conversation brings up unwanted or awkward feelings within inside of myself. And I don't want to do that. And I don't often, in my own illusion, see the benefit in going there. It just makes me feel yucky. It makes me feel bad. It makes me feel less than. So I want to avoid it without realizing the good news, the growth, the opportunity is on the other side of that emotion. And there's no way that we can get to the other side of that emotion if you're not willing to sit in it for a moment, to understand the person and what they're doing, what they're coming from. I'm going to give you a personal story right here about how this happens in my own life, because I am the mother of 6 biological children and 2 incredible stepchildren. Okay. There is many conversations and quite frankly, many messes that I have made as an adult parent along the way in navigating the needs emotionally. Now, remember what I said, it's the emotional needs. It's the conflict in values. It's the conflict in lifestyle. And there's a lot of differences there amongst all of these beautiful human beings that are vastly different than my value system, my lifestyle, what I deem is correct and true and pure. And so if I'm going to bang heads with my adult children about these things, we're going to miss the opportunity for greater understanding and quite frankly, connection amongst us all. I'm going to shut the conversation down instead. And what have we accomplished? I don't get to understand them. They don't get to understand me. And out of that, there's no emerging way forward for us to move forward. And so eventually, if I were to hang out in that space, that relationship would be severed. Now, recently, I've had a conversation with my son. He's my middle son. And I just want to paint a picture for you. He was the sweet little boy who didn't want to be a bother to anybody. Now, he's surrounded with 5 other siblings. He, when he was growing up, didn't feel like he should or needed to advocate for what it is he needed and wanted. He just went along with, he supported me. He was the easiest child to raise. And And yet the throw off was that because there were so many other human beings, oftentimes there was a low level of neglect on his part. Not because I intended it, but because he never squeaked. You know that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease? Everybody else was squeaking. There was 5 others who were squeaking, and some of them exceptionally loudly. And yet he was the sweet little boy who didn't want to be a bother, that hung in the background and often went overlooked. Does this bring emotion up in me right now? Hell yeah, it does. Because I know it's true and I know it happened. But I only came to a place of understanding this, the two of us together collectively, because we were brave enough on both sides to have the conversation that hurt. And then I could understand why it was that he felt these things. And I could admit, you're right. I see how that could happen. And I agree with you. I can see where, even though it wasn't my vantage point, even though I didn't see it at the time, I can understand where you're coming from. And you know what? Now he's first on the list, not last, because we understand and we have an understanding. We have this continuous conversation around this, even to this day. Okay, I want to make sure you're first on the list.
I just want to point out to anyone listening, my stepbrother, who Staci is talking about, is in his 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So this conversation can happen when your child is in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Even though they didn't have this conversation long ago, they both weren't ready to, but now they had it, and healing can still take place even now. Like, I think sometimes we feel that, okay, that time has passed. And as the parent, you don't want to talk about it because you have shame about how you handled those situations, even though you're doing the best you could with what you had. But having those conversations, even though they're tough, can heal the parts of the child that needed to heal now.
And it heals me too.
Right.
It's not just about healing the child. It's about we heal together, because then I can look and understand as well as admit and clean up mistakes and messes that were made. Look, we're going to make them as a parent. There is no perfect parent on the planet. That does not exist. If we refuse to come to these places of new understanding and insight as a collective, then what happens is no progression or no new path forward can be made. We stay in the same old places, rehashing the same old conversations, and then the desire and the will to have the conversations dies off. And I go, forget it. I'm just going to be done. I can't do this anymore. And those are literally the choices we make. We either muster up the courage and the skill to have these conversations, and so I can grow and my son can grow and we can find a new understanding and path forward. That's the beauty of talking about it. We can literally talk about and understand the mess and then decide what it is we can do now today, right? That we didn't do then. And that gives us a path forward to continue to rebuild and establish our relationship. If not, then you're left with nothing. You're left with a void that eventually will become something that may or may not even exist at holidays or birthdays or celebrations. And that's how we get here. Now, look, I know these conversations are ongoing for me and forever will be. And I've embraced the fact that if I can just have the hard conversation, it's always going to take me to a beautiful place. And I want you to know that that's true for you too. And we can't step into these conversations and have them like we typically do as a human being. Like the minute my son tried to talk about this, imagine for a moment if I said, oh no, son, we don't talk about those things. That's in the past. Why we got to bring it up? That's no big deal, right? I did my best. Don't you understand where I'm coming from? Which is what we would tend to do. I have to say, gosh, this must be true and real for you. Help me understand where you're coming from. You know, how did you come to this conclusion? What were the components of this that I can learn from? And we can have a different conversation. And once one of you understands the other, because someone has set their agenda down long enough to understand, there will always be an opportunity for the other person to feel understood as well. I like to say give first and give fast in these situations, because the quicker I can understand where you're coming from will be the quicker that you're going to be open enough to understand what my experience was too, which takes me to another point that I want to make. As human beings, we all have different perspectives and takeaways from any chosen, given experience, whether that happens by happenstance or whether it happens by choice. We're going to collect data in our environments with the words that we say and the emotions that are being felt within us, and we're going to put the meaning on that. And I love this exercise. If you get 50 people or 100 people or 1,000 people in a room and you show a picture, you flash a word, you're going to get that many different perspectives. Sure, some will come to the same conclusion, but it's going to be expressed differently. And I think that's really important for us to remember. We're not going to be on the same page as our child in regards to what happened in a difficult event that went down. Everybody's going to have their takeaway around that. And our opportunity here is to understand what those perspectives were. That's what contributes to the whole and gives us what it is we need to decide how it is we want to go forward and create more of the good stuff, more of the moments that we all long for and we're seeking for. But we cannot get there if we are unwilling to understand something that doesn't make any sense outside of us, and we only want to defend our perspective and feel hurt and taking it personal on the other side. There is no way for that to happen, okay? So it's like we block our own path through. We also can get exceptionally frustrated. And when that happens, when the emotions start to run high, and this is where we're probably going to step into manipulation, control, force, belittling, criticizing, minimizing. Those are our favorite tactics to reach for when we feel threatened or have awkward feelings inside of us that we don't know what to do with. That also stops the conversation towards understanding. There's no way we can get there if I'm defending the fort on my side, so to speak. There's no new places that we can explore or strategize. Now, I'm not saying these won't make you cry. I'm not saying that these won't incite high levels of emotion for you, which for me just highlights the fact that we got to get better at this. We got to skill up in order to go where it is we want to go and, quite frankly, deserve to go on both sides. It's important and it matters. And if we don't do these things, if we don't learn the skills that rudder these principles I'm talking about, then our relationships are going to continue to be cut off. There's going to continuously be a void. Now, we think that just because we lop it off, whether I'm talking about a divorce, a separation, or a parent or a child, that we're done with it. The hell you are. You're not done with it. There's going to be a tremendous amount of grief and regret, often, more often than not. Sometimes, yes, I'm going to agree that there are egregious levels of behavior and circumstances that we've survived where cutting somebody completely off is absolutely warranted. And in those cases, there's going to be a sense of relief, a sense of peace, a sense of freedom. And if that's not the case for you, if you're left with grief and regret, those are things that are highlighting to you, okay, maybe we can approach this from a different place. Maybe there's a new way that we can step into this conversation, or I'm not ready to let this go quite yet. There's still some things that I'm hopeful of. There's still some things I would like to try and explore. And so I would suggest to you that rather than just think it's going to be final once you cut somebody off, that we do this in phases. I like to think of quasi drawing a line in the sand or declaring what it is you need as more like a garage door. A boundary is more like a garage door often because I can close it all the way for a period of time. And then if I want to, I can reopen it and try and establish a connection to see if by chance there has been some evolution on my part from the skilling up or evolution on somebody else's part, if that's where I want to go. I call this a round. We can do as many rounds as we want to. And for those of you who know it's time to completely close that garage door, I honor that as well. It has to be an individual case by case. There is no set it and forget it about this. Like I can't say things, and please be shy and wary of people who say, if somebody ever does this to you, then you need to slam it and be done and shut the door. That might be true for the person telling you that, but it may or may not be true for you. And if you do it against what it is you feel or know to be true inside of yourself, that's when we get this throw off of grief and regret. So there's some things to be explored here in our relationships that are very, very significant. And significant relationships are parent-child. As I like to say, they have lifetime impact.
I feel like in these situations of adult children cutting off their parents, I'll use the example of not being accepted for being gay or trans or bisexual, and their parent is just unwilling to have any type of conversation or accept that. I would probably say that there's a sense of peace for the child and a sense of grief for the adult. In that situation, if I feel like it is natural that it probably did happen in stages. They probably were like, okay, can we talk about this? And then the parent was just unwilling to hear them or...
Yes, and I've seen it go both ways. I've seen a child cut off a parent, and all of a sudden, because of the parent's grief and regret around these things, comes in, does some work, and wants to reestablish connection to the child now because they're in a different place. We also have to remember that pain is an incredible motivator for us as human beings.
I was saying the same thing as you,
Yeah.
that can happen. But for the children who are at their wits' end because they're just like, I don't know what else to do, then say, I just can't be treated like this anymore. I bet you there's a lot of children who do this, have a sense of peace, but also might feel guilty for feeling that peace,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, for sure. And that guilt is, this isn't the guilt comes from, this isn't the narrative that I was told it was supposed to play
Exactly.
out here in
Yeah.
my life, right? And it
Mhm.
was supposed to go a totally different way. And whenever we find ourselves, again, going back to those things that create pain for us, right? If I go back to feeling like I'm unwanted, I'm unaccepted, I'm undervalued, my values, my lifestyle, my beliefs are constantly put down and criticized, just know that's always going to minimize us as a human being. And the generation I come from, quite frankly, that was our greatest hack. Like you can start to see the evolution of skills and understanding now in the relational realm. Our generation, quite frankly, was raised very much in a conversation of you do what I say, I'm the parent, don't talk back to me, you have no voice, I'm big, you're little, I'm the leader, and it doesn't really matter how you feel about it. I remember actually hearing those words. I don't care how you feel about it. This is what we're going to do because I'm the parent. You remember hearing that?
Certainly, maybe not those exact, but yes, we have to understand evolution and how things change. And I think there's so many, this is like we've talked about at the beginning, it's a huge conversation, but I would say what I sense is so troubling about this for wherever you fall, whatever side, if you're the parent or the child in this particular case of estrangement that we're speaking about, is it's bumping up anytime that we feel being pulled away, voluntarily or not, from our most essential foundation. And I think that's why the times we're living in now are so challenging, because many of those places that we have a job for a period of time, all these places are literally, we're being challenged that that's not going to be the case anymore. And so that's why it takes a lot of careful navigation, I guess.
Well, I want our listeners to be able to see the evolution from when we were being raised by parents to now how parents are raising their children. There's a huge conversation there that has evolved that sometimes we lose sight of or track of historic. There was very much, I'm the leader, you go along, you do what I say, and don't buck against it, or there's going to be a lot of hell to pay, so to speak. There's going to be punishment, there's going to be consequences. And so we very much learned I had a wonderful childhood. I had a wonderful mother, but I'm just saying we learned very much a low level way of just putting up with and not really saying or stating or disclosing or uncovering how I felt about it. You just kind of learned, if you wanted to be successful in what was being imparted to you, to kind of suck up what didn't work for you and do it anyway because you wanted to be part of the family. You wanted to be part of the system. And the threat was always, if you don't go along with what it is we're imparting to you, then you're going to be cut off, pushed out, not accepted, criticized, belittled, those kinds of things. And
yeah, and as a byproduct of that, there were a lot of secrets that were kept from parents, and you had to hide who you really were. So yeah, I know some of the baby boomer parents are like, why can't it just be like that anymore? Because people don't
evolution.
want to live like that anymore.
I was just going to say, just like we didn't want to live with the old idea that came from our parents of you're just going to marry somebody and you're going to just suck it up and you're going to
For 50
for
years.
the rest of your life because you made your bed, now lie in it, right? Our generation said, you know what? I don't buy into that. And now our generation of kids are saying, look, I don't care if we're family or blood or not. It's not okay to mistreat anybody for any reason. And now, as we're going back, just think about the dynamic here. The younger generation who has been born and raised in this, right? Because of the evolution from us saying, no, I want our kids to have a voice. I know what that felt like to not have a voice when I was a kid, and I want to give that to our children. And so our generation learned to have a voice. We started implementing this idea that we care about what you think and how you feel. And now our kids are taking it to a whole new level of saying, yeah, and this other stuff where you keep secrets and not tell the truth and not be who truly you are and that authentic stuff, we're not going to deal with that either. And there you see the evolution yet again down to the next generation. And so when they approach the baby boomer parents and say, you need to start uncovering your shit, we go, oh, wait a minute, that's not how it was done when I was raised. And you're going to tell me now I have to go and uncover 60 years of stuff? I don't know that I want to do that. I just want to stop here. There's no right or wrong on either side. All we're trying to impart here is how we've arrived at where we are. And to dig into and face one's secrets, I just want to impart is the most courageous work we ever do. And thank goodness for our kids that they didn't have a lot of secrets that started to pile up that then they were going to have to address in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
The part I meant about the secrets was that kids now feel like they can be their true selves to everybody around them. So you guys your generation, a lot of gay and lesbian and bisexual and trans people didn't feel that they could tell their parents that because it was their parents' way or the highway. So that issue didn't really exist a lot. And if it did, it was highly under wraps and no one really talked about it. And it was kept within the family and it wasn't shared. So these things are so different now because we feel like we can tell our parents, or some people do, because you, the baby boomers, wanted the kids to have more voice. So this thing, like, parents today are like, why is this happening? What is going on? Kids are being brainwashed. They're going no contact. No, it's the evolution that Staci is talking about here. It's because so much is different from when you guys were kids. Now it's different. We don't have to live in secret. We don't have to keep these things in the dark. It's okay to be who you are. But the parents are not really following through all the way on that, you know? So
they're because they're human beings, are going to butt into their own value systems. Just like the kids have a value system that was basically ignited when we decided we were going to give them a voice. You know, nothing stays stagnant. So this is going to take a momentum in place where they're going to spiral forward. And of course, they're going to want to be more and more expressed and more authentic to who they truly are. They don't want that internal emotional conflict that happens when we feel like we need to do one thing, but we better do another because that's how it's supposed to be done. They're pushing against all of that. And there's some things from their childhood they want to explore and they want to understand. And our generation, we have a lot of secrets.
All right, it's time to leave the Love Shack. But before we part ways, we want you to know our door is always open and we'll leave the porch light on, ready to welcome you back whenever you need a dose of relationship wisdom. For more resources and tools, visit us at loveshacklive.com.